Hey friend, welcome to Sleepy History World. Before we begin tonight's journey, if this channel becomes a place you enjoy returning to, a quiet corner where slow storytelling helps you unwind and drift toward a peaceful night's sleep, I'd really appreciate it if you took a moment to subscribe. It helps the channel grow, and it lets me continue bringing you relaxing history stories from every corner of the past. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let the noise of today slowly fade away. Tonight, we're stepping into a world that almost feels too extravagant to be real. Imagine waking up not in a small Victorian cottage, but in a magnificent mansion where dozens of servants have already been working for hours before your eyes even open. Your clothes have been laid out, your breakfast is waiting, your horses are saddled, and every detail of your day has been carefully arranged long before you take your first sip of tea. While millions of ordinary Victorians laboured in smoky factories, crowded streets, and dangerous coal mines, a tiny handful of families lived in astonishing comfort. They dined beneath glittering chandeliers, travelled in elegant carriages, hosted lavish balls, and filled their homes with priceless art collected from across the world. But behind the polished silver, grand staircases, and endless luxury was a fascinating society, built on tradition, privilege, and an army of invisible servants who made this extraordinary lifestyle possible. So settle in, relax, and let your imagination carry you back to Victorian England, where we'll discover what life was really like for the filthy rich. Imagine arriving in Victorian England not as a factory worker struggling to survive, nor as a shopkeeper trying to make ends meet, but as one of the extraordinarily wealthy few whose fortunes seemed almost limitless. While much of Britain was transformed by roaring factories, crowded cities, and endless clouds of coal smoke, your life would unfold in an entirely different world, one where money insulated you from nearly every hardship that ordinary people accepted as unavoidable. Your mornings would not begin with the shrill whistle of a mill or the rush to catch a train to work. Instead, they might begin beneath embroidered silk curtains in a bedroom so large it echoed when you spoke. The mattress beneath you would be stuffed with horsehair or feathers, covered in crisp linen changed regularly by servants you might barely know by name before your feet even touched the floor. Someone may already have lit the fireplace to remove the morning chill. Another servant would quietly bring hot water for washing, while yet another prepared your wardrobe for the day. Dressing itself was not a quick task, but a carefully managed ritual, involving multiple layers of expensive fabrics, polished boots, delicate gloves, jewellery, and carefully arranged hairstyles. The wealthiest households employed ladies' maids, valets, butlers, footmen, housekeepers, cooks, kitchen maids, scullery maids, gardeners, coachmen, stable boys, laundresses, governesses, and nursemaids. In the grandest estates, more than 50 servants could work behind the scenes, ensuring that their employers rarely had to lift a finger. Their entire purpose was to make comfort appear effortless. Even something as simple as pouring tea or opening a carriage door became someone else's responsibility. Breakfast was served in elegant dining rooms, filled with polished mahogany furniture, glittering silverware, and imported porcelain. Unlike poorer families, who often relied on bread, porridge, or leftovers, the rich enjoyed lavish spreads featuring eggs, bacon, smoked fish, fresh fruit imported from distant countries, pastries, preserves, kidneys, cold meats, and endless pots of tea and coffee. Exotic foods that took weeks to arrive by ship became symbols of prestige rather than necessity. Every meal quietly announced that money could conquer both distance and season. Fresh grapes in winter or oranges from the Mediterranean reminded every guest that wealth could bend nature itself. Yet the meal was rarely rushed. Conversations drifted between politics, literature, horse racing, the latest inventions, or news from London's social circles. Newspapers arrived daily, filled with reports from across the expanding British Empire, whose vast territories supplied fortunes through trade, mining, plantations, shipping, and industry. Many aristocratic families had owned land for centuries. But during the Victorian era, a growing number of industrial millionaires joined their ranks. Factory owners, railway investors, bankers, shipping magnates, steel manufacturers, and merchants accumulated fortunes unlike anything earlier generations could have imagined. Some built enormous country houses that deliberately rivaled ancient aristocratic estates, hoping wealth could purchase social acceptance, while old nobility sometimes looked down upon these newly rich industrial families. Extravagant parties, charitable donations, and advantageous marriages gradually blurred the distinction between inherited titles and newly earned fortunes. After breakfast, the day unfolded at an almost leisurely pace. There was rarely any expectation of physical labour. Estate managers handled finances, lawyers managed legal affairs, and accountants tracked investments. A gentleman might spend his morning reviewing correspondence, meeting tenants, supervising improvements to his estates, or visiting Parliament if he held political office. Others devoted themselves to collecting rare books, studying natural history, painting, or simply enjoying long rides across their private lands. Women of the upper classes faced different expectations. Society often discouraged professional work entirely. Instead, they managed household staff, planned elaborate dinners, supervised children's education through governesses, organized charitable activities, practiced music, embroidery, watercolor painting, or hosted afternoon tea. Appearances mattered immensely. Every action reflected not only personal character, but family reputation. Etiquette became almost a language of its own. Knowing exactly how to greet a duchess, when to send calling cards, which fork to use at dinner, or how long to remain during a social visit, demonstrated that one truly belonged among society's elite. Mistakes could become the subject of whispered conversations across drawing rooms for weeks. Clothing represented another astonishing display of wealth. Gentlemen commissioned tailored suits made from the finest wool, silk waistcoats, top hats, and polished leather boots. Ladies wore elaborate gowns requiring astonishing quantities of fabric, decorated with lace, ribbons, pearls, beads, and intricate embroidery. Crinolines and bustles dramatically expanded the shape of skirts, sometimes making it difficult simply to pass through a doorway. Jewelry sparkled under candlelight, while imported perfumes scented every room. Fashion changed regularly, encouraging constant spending among those determined to remain socially relevant. Yet behind every elegant dress stood invisible armies of seamstresses, textile workers, and factory labourers, whose own lives looked nothing like those of the women wearing their creations. The Victorian rich inhabited a world sustained by countless unseen hands. Entertainment occupied much of the calendar. Afternoon visits, musical performances, garden parties, lavish dinners, theatrical productions, and charity balls filled entire seasons. London's social season became particularly important. Aristocratic families moved from their country estates into magnificent townhouses, where invitations determined social standing. A successful season could introduce daughters to wealthy or titled husbands, strengthening family fortunes for another generation. Ballrooms glittered beneath crystal chandeliers while orchestras played waltzes late into the evening. Hundreds of candles illuminated polished mirrors that multiplied the brilliance until entire rooms seemed to glow. Guests discussed colonial adventures, scientific discoveries, politics, literature, and the latest gossip, while servants silently replenished champagne glasses and cleared away untouched delicacies. Outside those grand houses, thousands of London's poorest citizens struggled with overcrowding, disease, and hunger. Yet many wealthy Victorians experienced these realities only from carriage windows. Travel itself became increasingly luxurious. Railways connected cities with remarkable speed, and first-class railway compartments offered upholstered seating far removed from crowded third-class carriages. Wealthy families also travelled across Europe, visiting Paris, Rome, Switzerland, or the Mediterranean. Some embarked upon lengthy tours through Egypt or India, collecting souvenirs that decorated drawing rooms back home. Steamships shrank oceans while expanding opportunities for both business and pleasure. Owning horses remained another visible symbol of status. Elegant carriages carried families through parks, lined with similarly wealthy acquaintances. Country estates frequently included extensive stables, where prized horses received better medical care than many poor families could afford for themselves. Hunting parties became elaborate social occasions rather than simple methods of obtaining food. Fox hunting, deer stalking, pheasant shooting, and fishing combined recreation with displays of land ownership and privilege. A vast estate itself functioned almost like a private kingdom. Miles of landscaped gardens, ornamental lakes, greenhouses overflowing with exotic plants, libraries containing thousands of volumes, conservatories filled with palms imported from distant colonies, art galleries, billiard rooms, smoking rooms, nurseries, servants' quarters, wine cellars, and grand staircases reflected not merely wealth but power. Maintaining such properties required continuous labour from gardeners, gamekeepers, carpenters, plumbers, blacksmiths, and domestic staff. The owner often knew only a fraction of the people whose work sustained daily comfort. Dinner represented the pinnacle of Victorian elegance. Guests changed into formal evening attire before gathering for meals that sometimes included 10 or more carefully orchestrated courses: soup, fish, roast meats, game birds, vegetables, desserts, cheeses, fruits, wines, and liqueurs appeared in carefully timed succession. Every plate, glass, and utensil occupied its precise place according to strict etiquette. Conversation avoided controversial topics, unless among close friends. Political disagreements might be expressed politely, but raising one's voice risked social embarrassment. Servants moved almost invisibly, replacing plates with astonishing efficiency, while ensuring no guest's glass remained empty for long. The wealthiest families often competed through hospitality, each dinner attempting to surpass the previous gathering in elegance and refinement. Yet despite unimaginable privilege, life among the Victorian elite carried its own pressures. Marriages frequently reflected financial strategy as much as romance. Maintaining appearances demanded enormous expense. Families burdened themselves with lavish entertaining simply to preserve status. Scandals involving gambling debts, affairs, financial ruin, or unsuitable marriages threatened reputations built over generations. Public respectability became almost sacred. Even emotions were expected to remain carefully controlled in polite society. As darkness settled over the countryside, and the final carriage wheels rolled across the gravel driveway, the great house rarely became silent. Somewhere in the servants' corridors, boots echoed against stone floors as footmen completed their last rounds. Kitchen maids scrubbed enormous copper pots until they reflected the glow of oil lamps, while the butler carefully locked away expensive wines and silver cutlery worth more than many working families would earn in several years. Upstairs, however, life remained astonishingly peaceful. Heavy velvet curtains blocked the cold night air, thick carpets softened every footstep, and roaring fireplaces kept bedrooms warm throughout the winter. Even sleep itself was a luxury shaped by wealth. The wealthy did not worry about leaking roofs, smoky chimneys, filling tiny rooms, or freezing temperatures creeping through cracked walls. Their homes had been designed to protect comfort above all else, and dozens of servants worked tirelessly to ensure that comfort never disappeared. Owning a magnificent country estate meant possessing more than a beautiful home. It meant controlling an entire community. Hundreds or even thousands of acres stretched beyond the windows, including forests, farmland, villages, rivers, and tenant cottages. Many families had inherited these lands over generations, and the people living upon them often depended directly upon the estate owner. Farmers rented fields, labourers worked the land, blacksmiths repaired equipment, and village shops survived because the estate provided employment. During harvest festivals or Christmas celebrations, landlords sometimes distributed food, blankets, or money to poorer tenants, strengthening the image of the wealthy family as generous protectors. Yet this generosity also reinforced an unequal relationship in which power flowed in only one direction. The landlord made decisions that affected hundreds of lives while rarely experiencing the hardships endured by those who worked beneath him. Money itself behaved differently for the Victorian elite than it did for ordinary citizens. The wealthy often did not think in terms of weekly wages. Their fortunes came from rents collected across numerous properties, profits from factories, dividends from railway companies, shipping investments, colonial plantations, banks, insurance firms, or government bonds. Every morning letters arrived reporting profits from businesses scattered across Britain and the Empire. A single successful investment in railroads during the Victorian railway boom could transform an already wealthy family into one of unimaginable fortune. Others became rich through coal mines, ironworks, textile mills, or overseas trade linking Britain with India, Africa, Australia, and the Caribbean. The empire itself functioned almost like an enormous economic machine feeding luxury into British drawing rooms. Tea from India, sugar from the Caribbean, wool from Australia, spices from Ceylon, silk from China, ivory from Africa, and countless other products filled homes whose owners might never travel beyond Europe. For many aristocrats, however, displaying wealth mattered almost as much as possessing it. Simply being rich was not enough. One had to appear effortlessly rich. Speaking openly about money was often considered vulgar. Instead, wealth revealed itself through subtle details. Fresh flowers decorated every room regardless of season. Paintings by famous artists covered walls from floor to ceiling. Libraries contained thousands of leather-bound books, some never opened by their owners, but displayed because an educated household was expected to possess them. Grand pianos occupied drawing rooms whether anyone played them well or not. Crystal chandeliers illuminated ceilings, painted with elaborate designs. Every object quietly announced that expense had never been a concern. Even leisure demanded remarkable organization. A simple weekend house party might require weeks of preparation. Invitations were handwritten and delivered well in advance. Bedrooms were assigned according to social rank. Cooks planned elaborate menus, featuring dozens of ingredients sourced from multiple regions. Gardeners ensured every flower bed appeared perfect before guests arrived. Stable staff prepared horses for riding excursions, while gamekeepers organized hunting parties. Musicians might be hired for evening entertainment, and servants polished every piece of silver until it gleamed beneath candlelight. When guests finally arrived, everything appeared natural, as though such perfection required no effort at all. Behind this illusion stood an army of workers, whose names many visitors never learned. Conversation itself became a refined skill among the upper classes. Education emphasized not merely reading and writing, but speaking gracefully on almost any respectable subject. A gentleman was expected to discuss literature, politics, geography, history, science, art, or travel without appearing boastful. Ladies were encouraged to demonstrate intelligence while remaining polite and composed according to Victorian expectations. Social gatherings became performances in which wit, charm, and impeccable manners carried enormous value. Knowing the latest novel by Charles Dickens, the newest scientific discovery, or developments within Parliament made one an engaging guest, at the same time openly discussing personal finances, bodily functions, or controversial scandals risked damaging one's reputation. Children raised within these privileged households often experienced a surprisingly structured upbringing. From an early age, they learned that their behavior reflected the honor of generations before them. Boys frequently wore miniature versions of adult clothing, attended prestigious boarding schools, and later studied at Oxford or Cambridge before entering politics, the military, diplomacy, or estate management. Girls received lessons in French, piano, singing, drawing, dancing, etiquette, and household management, preparing them to become accomplished hostesses within elite society. While modern parents might spend hours playing with their children, Victorian aristocratic parents often maintained a more formal relationship. Much of childhood unfolded under the supervision of governesses and nursemaids, whose influence sometimes exceeded that of the children's own mothers and fathers. Illness presented another striking contrast between rich and poor. Although Victorian medicine remained limited by modern standards, the wealthy enjoyed advantages unavailable to ordinary people. Distinguished physicians made house calls directly to grand estates. Expensive treatments, private nursing, healthier diets, cleaner living conditions, and spacious homes reduced exposure to many diseases common in overcrowded cities. Nevertheless, even the richest families remained vulnerable to illnesses such as tuberculosis, influenza, scarlet fever, or cholera before advances in modern medicine. Wealth could purchase comfort, but it could not always purchase survival. Entire aristocratic families occasionally mourned children lost to diseases that doctors could do little to cure. The arrival of new technology fascinated the Victorian elite. During Queen Victoria's reign, extraordinary inventions transformed daily life. Railways dramatically shortened travel times. Telegraph wires allowed messages to cross great distances in minutes instead of days. Photography captured faces with astonishing realism. Gas lighting brightened streets and interiors before electricity gradually appeared in wealthier homes during the late Victorian period. Telephones eventually entered some of the grandest households. Wealthy families often became early adopters of these innovations, not only because they could afford them, but because possessing the latest technology reinforced their reputation for sophistication and modernity. Visitors admired mechanical marvels almost as eagerly as priceless paintings. Pets also reflected privilege. Hunting dogs received exceptional care, often sleeping in specially prepared kennels with dedicated staff responsible for their health. Elegant ladies kept pampered lapdogs, exotic birds, or unusual animals collected during foreign travels. Horses remained the greatest symbols of wealth, with pedigrees carefully recorded and breeding programs managed almost like scientific enterprises. Winning prestigious horse races brought enormous prestige, in addition to financial rewards, encouraging aristocrats to invest heavily in breeding champion racehorses. Despite their luxurious surroundings, not every wealthy Victorian enjoyed financial security forever. Some inherited magnificent estates, burdened by crushing debts accumulated over generations. Agricultural depressions reduced rental income, while maintaining enormous houses consumed staggering amounts of money. Servants' wages, building repairs, taxes, lavish entertaining, expensive wardrobes, overseas travel, and constant social obligations drained fortunes with surprising speed. As industrial millionaires accumulated fresh wealth through commerce, some ancient aristocratic families quietly struggled to maintain appearances despite declining incomes. Selling paintings, jewelry, or parcels of land became painful necessities hidden behind carefully preserved smiles. Marriage remained one of the most significant financial decisions an elite family could make. Romantic love certainly existed, but practical considerations often dominated discussions between parents. A suitable marriage united fortunes, estates, political influence, and respected family names. Newspaper announcements celebrated prestigious engagements, while society eagerly analysed every detail of lavish weddings. Young women entering London's social season understood that every dance, dinner invitation, and garden party might introduce a future husband. There were moments when even the smallest daily inconvenience simply disappeared from the lives of the Victorian elite because someone else existed to solve it before it became noticeable. If a fire burned too low, a servant quietly added coal. If muddy boots needed cleaning after a walk through the estate, they vanished overnight and returned spotless by morning. If a dress required mending, a seamstress repaired it before the owner even remembered the tear. Fresh flowers appeared in vases without anyone asking where they came from. Sheets were washed, carpets beaten, windows polished, horses fed, clocks wound, lamps lit, letters delivered, meals prepared, luggage packed, and gardens maintained almost as if the house itself possessed magical powers. In reality, every moment of effortless luxury depended upon relentless human labor hidden behind swinging kitchen doors and narrow servants' staircases, designed specifically to keep the staff out of sight. A perfectly functioning household was considered a sign that its servants were nearly invisible. Guests admired the grandeur of the home without noticing the dozens of people quietly making it possible. Time itself seemed to move differently for the wealthy. Ordinary Victorians measured their days by factory whistles, shop opening hours, or exhausting work schedules. The rich measured time by invitations, social seasons, hunting calendars, parliamentary sessions, and family traditions. Summer meant retreating to vast country estates where gardens exploded with roses, lavender, and carefully manicured hedges. Autumn brought shooting parties across mist-covered fields, followed by lavish dinners celebrating the day's success. Winter encouraged grand Christmas gatherings beside roaring fireplaces, while spring marked the return to London, where society came alive with receptions, concerts, balls, and elegant dinners. Life followed a rhythm shaped less by survival than by custom. The architecture surrounding the wealthy reflected enormous confidence in Britain's growing power. Their homes were designed not merely for living, but for impressing everyone who entered. Visitors often approached through long tree-lined driveways before catching their first glimpse of towering stone facades, decorated with columns, carved statues, sweeping staircases, and endless rows of windows. Inside, entrance halls stretched upward beneath ornate ceilings, painted with mythological scenes or family crests. Marble floors echoed beneath polished shoes, while portraits of long-dead ancestors stared down from gilded frames, reminding every visitor that the family's history extended back through generations. For newly wealthy industrialists who lacked centuries of noble ancestry, commissioning grand portraits and constructing magnificent houses became ways of creating a legacy that appeared just as ancient. Every room had a purpose. Morning rooms welcomed sunlight for breakfast and informal conversation. Drawing rooms hosted afternoon tea and polite social calls. Libraries projected intelligence and refinement, even if many books remained unread. Smoking rooms allowed gentlemen to discuss politics after dinner, while conservatories filled with tropical plants demonstrated access to species gathered from Britain's colonies. Billiard rooms encouraged friendly competition, and grand ballrooms could accommodate hundreds of guests beneath glittering chandeliers. Even hallways became galleries displaying sculptures collected during European tours or archaeological expeditions. Wealth transformed the home into a carefully arranged museum of success. Art collecting became almost an obsession among many elite families. Owning paintings by respected artists elevated one's social standing, while sculptures from Italy or ancient artifacts from Greece and Egypt suggested sophistication and education. Some wealthy Victorians sponsored archaeological expeditions abroad, bringing home treasures that filled private galleries. Cabinets displayed delicate porcelain from China, carved ivory from Africa, clocks crafted in France, and intricate silverwork produced by Britain's finest craftsmen. Every object carried a story of wealth, travel, and influence, reinforcing the idea that the world itself had become accessible to those who possessed enough money. The Victorian obsession with respectability shaped almost every decision. Reputation could take decades to build yet disappear overnight through scandal. Newspapers eagerly reported shocking divorces, gambling debts, political embarrassments, or rumors of infidelity involving prominent families. Since society watched closely, appearances became everything. Even families facing financial difficulties often continued hosting expensive parties because admitting hardship threatened their social position. It was not unusual for aristocratic households to borrow heavily simply to maintain the illusion that nothing had changed. In some cases, magnificent silverware displayed during dinners had quietly been sold and replaced with less valuable pieces, while priceless paintings disappeared from walls after being auctioned to cover debts. Guests noticed only if they looked carefully. Education for the wealthy extended far beyond classrooms. Children learned how to behave in drawing rooms, greet distinguished guests, write elegant letters, host dinners, dance gracefully, ride horses confidently, and converse politely with strangers decades older than themselves. Young gentlemen studied Latin and Greek while preparing for leadership roles within government or the military. Young ladies practiced piano for hours until every movement appeared effortless, not because they expected professional careers, but because musical ability enhanced their desirability within fashionable society. Success meant appearing naturally talented even after years of disciplined practice. Letters connected the Victorian elite long before telephones became common. Every morning, silver trays carried stacks of correspondence into breakfast rooms. Invitations arrived for dinners, weddings, hunting weekends, charity events, or parliamentary receptions. Business letters discussed investments, estate matters, or overseas opportunities. Families exchanged news about births, illnesses, engagements, and deaths through beautifully handwritten pages folded with remarkable precision. Responding promptly reflected good manners, while ignoring correspondence risked appearing rude or indifferent. Entire relationships flourished through carefully chosen words written with ink rather than spoken aloud. For wealthy women especially, flowers became an elegant language. Victorians attached symbolic meanings to different plants, allowing bouquets to express affection, admiration, gratitude, or sympathy without saying a single word. Greenhouses on country estates cultivated orchids, roses, lilies, camellias, and countless exotic species imported from across the empire. Skilled gardeners devoted entire careers to producing blooms that decorated tables throughout the year. Fresh flowers appeared at nearly every social gathering, their fragrance blending with candle wax, polished wood, perfume, and fine cuisine to create an atmosphere guests remembered long after returning home. Afternoon tea gradually evolved into one of the defining rituals of upper-class Victorian life. Around 4 o'clock, elegant china appeared alongside silver teapots, delicate sandwiches, sponge cakes, scones, preserves, and pastries. Yet tea represented far more than a simple meal. It offered an opportunity for conversation, networking, matchmaking, and quiet observation. Friends exchanged the latest society gossip, while discussing literature, travel, fashion, or politics with remarkable politeness. New acquaintances might receive invitations to future dinners, while promising marriages occasionally began over cups of tea poured with practiced elegance. The wealthy also enjoyed access to remarkable educational and cultural institutions. Museums expanded rapidly during the Victorian era, displaying fossils, ancient artifacts, paintings, scientific inventions, and treasures collected from across the British Empire. Private lectures introduced audiences to groundbreaking discoveries involving electricity, evolution, archaeology, astronomy, and engineering. Many elite Victorians genuinely believed they were living during humanity's greatest age of progress. Railways crossed continents, steamships shrank oceans, telegraph cables connected nations, and industry produced goods on an unprecedented scale. Optimism filled many drawing rooms as wealthy investors anticipated even greater prosperity in the decades ahead. Yet beneath this confidence lingered subtle anxieties. Industrialization transformed society so quickly that traditional aristocratic values occasionally struggled to keep pace. New millionaires appeared almost overnight through commerce, rather than inherited land. Scientific discoveries challenged long-held religious beliefs. Expanding cities brought unfamiliar social problems. Political reform gradually increased democratic participation, reducing the unquestioned authority once enjoyed by aristocratic landowners. Some wealthy Victorians feared that rapid change threatened the elegant world they had inherited, while others eagerly embraced progress and invested heavily in Britain's industrial future. Perhaps the greatest luxury enjoyed by the filthy rich was freedom from uncertainty. Poor families constantly worried about tomorrow's wages, rising food prices, illness, unemployment, or eviction. The wealthy rarely questioned whether dinner would appear on the table or whether fuel remained for the fireplace. Their attention focused instead on choosing destinations for summer holidays, selecting wines for upcoming banquets, commissioning portraits from respected artists, or deciding whether to renovate another wing of the estate. Beyond the glittering chandeliers and polished silver, another remarkable aspect of life among the Victorian elite was the extraordinary sense of privacy that wealth could purchase. While crowded industrial cities forced working class families to live in tiny homes where every conversation could be overheard, the rich occupied houses so vast that family members might not see one another for hours. A gentleman could retreat to his private library, where floor-to-ceiling bookshelves muffled every sound from the rest of the house. A lady might spend an afternoon in a sunlit sitting room overlooking carefully designed gardens, interrupted only when a servant quietly entered with fresh tea. Children had their own nurseries. Governesses had separate rooms. Guests occupied entire wings of the house, and servants disappeared into hidden corridors built specifically so the household's daily operations remained invisible. Even architecture reflected social hierarchy, with grand staircases reserved for the family and elegant visitors, while narrow back staircases allowed servants to move unseen from one floor to another. Two entirely different worlds existed beneath the same roof, connected only by duty. The wealthy also possessed something many ordinary Victorians could barely imagine: the luxury of collecting memories rather than necessities. A hunting trip to Scotland produced antlers displayed proudly above fireplaces for decades. A journey through Italy returned with marble statues and paintings that decorated drawing rooms. A visit to Egypt might inspire the purchase of ancient artifacts or fashionable furniture influenced by Egyptian design. Every vacation became another opportunity to fill the home with reminders of distant places. Travel was not simply recreation. It became a way of demonstrating culture, education, and financial independence. Returning from the continent with stories of Venice, Paris, Vienna, or Rome immediately elevated one's standing in fashionable society. Books occupied an especially important place within wealthy households. Victorian Britain experienced an explosion in publishing, and the rich, eagerly built impressive personal libraries. Leather, bound editions of Shakespeare, Milton, Homer, Dickens, Walter Scott, Tennyson, and countless historians lined polished oak shelves from floor to ceiling. Some gentlemen devoted entire rooms to scientific journals, atlases, travel accounts, and philosophical works, while ladies often maintained collections of poetry, novels, and devotional literature. Reading was not merely entertainment, but a mark of refinement. An educated household was expected to discuss the latest publications over dinner, just as naturally as modern people discuss films or television series. Music filled many evenings. Before radios, recordings, or streaming services existed, entertainment often came directly from those gathered inside the house. Daughters performed piano sonatas, learned through years of disciplined practice, while guests sang popular Victorian songs or classical pieces accompanied by violins and cellos. Wealthier families occasionally hired professional musicians to perform during dinners or celebrations, transforming drawing rooms into intimate concert halls. The ability to play an instrument gracefully became another symbol of cultivation, particularly for young women hoping to make favourable impressions during the London social season. Conversation after dinner sometimes lasted for hours. Gentlemen debated imperial politics, railway expansion, scientific discoveries, or foreign affairs, while smoking cigars imported from Cuba. Ladies discussed literature, travel, charity work, fashion, and family news. Games such as whist, chess, and billiards provided quiet competition, while others gathered around fireplaces to read aloud from newly published novels. Unlike modern evenings dominated by screens, Victorian households relied upon conversation itself as one of their greatest forms of entertainment. The ability to tell an amusing story or engage in thoughtful discussion became a valued social talent. The wealthy also experienced nature very differently from the working classes. For labourers, fields represented exhausting work beneath unpredictable weather. For aristocrats, the countryside symbolised beauty, recreation, and relaxation. Carefully landscaped parks surrounded grand houses, designed by famous landscape architects who reshaped hills, lakes, forests, and gardens to appear naturally picturesque. Winding paths encouraged leisurely walks beneath ancient oak trees. Artificial lakes reflected elegant stone bridges. Swans drifted across calm water, while gardeners ensured every flowerbed appeared flawless regardless of season. Nature itself became carefully managed, sculpted into an idealized vision that reflected order and prosperity. Gardening evolved into a respected hobby among many wealthy Victorians. Greenhouses warmed by coal, fired boilers allowed exotic plants from tropical climates to flourish even during cold English winters. Orchids, palms, bananas, pineapples, and rare flowers amazed visitors unfamiliar with such botanical treasures. Estate owners proudly competed to cultivate the rarest species, exchanging seeds and specimens with collectors throughout the empire. Successful gardens reflected not merely wealth but curiosity about the expanding natural world. Photography also transformed elite society during Queen Victoria's reign. Earlier generations relied solely upon painted portraits requiring weeks or months to complete. By the mid-19th century, photography offered an entirely new way to preserve family history. Wealthy households commissioned formal photographs, marking weddings, birthdays, military service, graduations, and important anniversaries. Albums filled with carefully arranged portraits occupied drawing rooms, allowing future generations to gaze directly upon the faces of ancestors, rather than artistic interpretations. Although early photographic sessions required subjects to remain perfectly still for uncomfortable lengths of time, families eagerly embraced the new technology because it preserved memories with remarkable accuracy. For those fortunate enough to inherit ancient titles, family history carried enormous significance. Portraits of ancestors stretched back centuries, depicting knights, admirals, politicians, judges, bishops, and military heroes, whose achievements formed the family's identity. Children grew up hearing stories celebrating brave forefathers who fought famous battles, advised kings, or built magnificent estates. This powerful sense of continuity encouraged aristocrats to view themselves as temporary guardians of a legacy rather than simple owners of wealth. Their responsibility, they believed, was to preserve the estate and family reputation before passing both to the next generation. Not every wealthy family lived exclusively in castles or country mansions. Some industrial millionaires preferred newly constructed villas featuring the latest Victorian architecture, complete with indoor plumbing, central heating innovations, decorative stained glass, and modern conveniences unavailable in many older aristocratic homes. These houses often reflected confidence in technology and progress rather than ancient tradition. While old noble families displayed portraits of medieval ancestors, self-made businessmen proudly showcased engineering achievements, factory models, and symbols of Britain's industrial success. Dining etiquette became increasingly elaborate throughout the Victorian period. Formal dinners required numerous forks, knives, spoons, glasses, serving dishes, and carefully timed courses. Guests learned never to begin eating before their host, never to speak with food in their mouths, and never to display excessive appetite, despite the astonishing quantity of food presented before them. Servants changed plates between nearly every course, ensuring each dish appeared fresh and perfectly arranged. Fine wines accompanied specific meals according to long-established customs. The dinner table functioned almost like a stage upon which refinement, discipline, and wealth performed together. Even illness within wealthy households unfolded differently. When someone became unwell, entire sections of the house could be reserved for recovery. Nurses attended constantly, doctors visited repeatedly, and family members often waited anxiously in richly furnished sitting rooms, while servants quietly carried medicines, fresh linens, and hot meals upstairs. Although medicine remained imperfect, comfort surrounded the patient at every stage. Thick curtains softened harsh light, fireplaces maintained warmth, and expensive remedies arrived from respected physicians. Wealth could not eliminate suffering, but it certainly softened many of its practical burdens. As the century progressed, electricity slowly began replacing gas lighting inside some of Britain's richest homes. Visitors marveled as rooms illuminated almost instantly without flickering flames or smoky odors. Electric bells allowed household members to summon servants from different parts of the house with remarkable convenience. Indoor bathrooms gradually became more luxurious, offering hot and cold running water in residences fortunate enough to afford advanced plumbing systems. Each technological improvement further separated elite living from the daily realities experienced by ordinary families. Looking back, perhaps the greatest privilege enjoyed by the filthy rich was not merely their magnificent homes, elegant clothing, or extravagant banquets. It was the confidence that tomorrow would resemble today. Their lives unfolded within an environment of remarkable stability, supported by inherited wealth, loyal servants, influential social networks, and an empire at the height of its power. Yet for all its beauty and grandeur, the world of the Victorian elite was governed by countless unwritten rules that could feel almost as restrictive as the hardships faced by the poor. Every public appearance, every invitation accepted or declined, every conversation held at a dinner table, and even the smallest gesture carried social meaning. A gentleman was expected to remain calm regardless of circumstance. Raising one's voice, displaying uncontrolled anger, or showing excessive emotion risked appearing uncivilized. Ladies faced even stricter expectations. They were encouraged to remain graceful, modest, and composed at all times, even during moments of personal grief or disappointment. Society admired self-control almost as much as it admired wealth. Children absorbed these expectations from their earliest years until good manners became second nature rather than conscious effort. One of the greatest displays of status was not owning beautiful possessions, but having enough free time to enjoy them. While factory workers measured every hour in wages earned, the wealthy could spend entire afternoons reading poetry beneath ancient oak trees, sketching landscapes beside quiet lakes, or simply strolling through carefully maintained rose gardens without any concern for productivity. Leisure itself became proof of financial success. To have no urgent work waiting was considered a privilege that only genuine wealth could provide. This freedom allowed many members of the upper classes to develop interests in astronomy, botany, archaeology, history, literature, painting, and collecting rare objects. Some became respected scholars despite never needing employment, funding scientific expeditions or archaeological excavations entirely from private fortunes. Country house weekends became legendary within Victorian society. Guests often arrived on Friday afternoon, after comfortable railway journeys, followed by elegant carriage rides through picturesque countryside. The weekend followed a carefully planned schedule. Mornings might begin with horseback riding or leisurely walks across the estate. Afternoons featured croquet on perfectly trimmed lawns, boating upon ornamental lakes, or visits to nearby villages owned by the estate. Evenings transformed into magnificent dinners, illuminated by hundreds of candles, before continuing with music, dancing, card games, or theatrical performances staged by the guests themselves. Conversation flowed effortlessly between politics, travel, scientific discoveries, novels, and amusing anecdotes gathered from London's fashionable circles. Entire friendships and political alliances developed during these seemingly relaxed gatherings. Many wealthy families also maintained homes by the sea. During the Victorian era, coastal resorts such as Brighton, Scarborough, and Torquay became fashionable destinations where fresh sea air was believed to improve health. Elegant hotels welcomed aristocrats seeking temporary escape from London's crowded streets or the responsibilities of country estates. Long promenades overlooked crashing waves while orchestras performed beneath decorative bandstands. Ladies carried delicate parasols against the sun. Gentlemen wore straw hats during summer afternoons, and children collected shells along beaches where generations earlier few members of the upper class would have considered spending leisure time. Even holidays reflected changing Victorian ideas about health, recreation, and family life. The Victorian fascination with science reached even the grandest drawing rooms. Wealthy hosts occasionally invited famous explorers, inventors, or naturalists to deliver private lectures before distinguished audiences. Imagine sitting beneath glittering chandeliers while an explorer described crossing African deserts, or listening as an engineer explained the astonishing power of steam engines transforming Britain's industries. Charles Darwin's theories sparked passionate discussions around countless dinner tables, while discoveries involving electricity, medicine, geology, and astronomy fascinated educated society. Unlike many earlier generations, Victorians genuinely believed they were witnessing an age in which knowledge expanded faster than ever before. Shopping itself became an experience unlike anything previous centuries had known. London's grand department stores displayed luxurious goods beneath enormous glass windows that attracted fashionable crowds. Wealthy ladies spent entire afternoons selecting imported silks, French perfumes, handcrafted gloves, elaborate hats decorated with feathers, and jewellery sparkling beneath gaslight. Gentlemen commissioned bespoke suits from respected tailors, who measured every detail with astonishing precision. Purchasing beautiful objects was not merely practical, but recreational, an opportunity to demonstrate taste, sophistication, and financial independence. Shop assistants treated distinguished customers with extraordinary courtesy, recognizing that a single wealthy client might spend more in one afternoon than an ordinary family earned in months. Pets often occupied surprisingly affectionate places within wealthy households. Small dogs accompanied ladies during carriage rides or rested beside fireplaces while family members read novels after dinner. Horses received names, careful breeding records, and exceptional veterinary care. Some aristocrats developed lifelong attachments to favourite hunting dogs, whose portraits even appeared in family galleries alongside human relatives. Compassion toward animals gradually became fashionable during the Victorian period, encouraging support for organisations promoting humane treatment. At the same time, fox hunting remained enormously popular among the upper classes, revealing the era's complicated attitudes toward animals. Weather influenced aristocratic life in ways that modern conveniences have largely erased. Heavy snow transformed country estates into peaceful landscapes where sleigh rides replaced carriage journeys. Thick morning fog rolling across London streets created mysterious scenes illuminated by gas lamps, delaying appointments and altering evening plans. Summer heat encouraged picnics beneath ancient trees, while autumn painted forests in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, just as hunting season began. Wealth allowed people to appreciate changing seasons for their beauty, rather than fear them for their effect on harvests or employment. Rain meant reading beside a warm fireplace, rather than worrying about losing a day's wages. For wealthy children, birthdays and Christmas mornings often appeared almost magical. Carefully wrapped gifts filled entire tables. New dolls arrived from Paris. Model ships delighted young boys fascinated by the Royal Navy. Beautifully illustrated books opened windows into imaginary worlds, and handcrafted toys displayed remarkable craftsmanship. Families gathered around towering Christmas trees, decorated with candles that flickered like tiny stars among glass ornaments and ribbons. Musicians performed seasonal songs, while cooks prepared enormous feasts lasting for hours. Yet these celebrations also included generous gifts for servants, reflecting the Victorian belief that loyal service deserved recognition, even if social boundaries remained firmly intact. The Victorian elite also placed enormous value upon legacy. Building a fortune mattered less if future generations failed to preserve it. Fathers carefully taught sons how to manage estates, negotiate investments, supervise tenants, and uphold family honour. Mothers instructed daughters in hosting elegant households capable of maintaining the family's reputation after marriage. Portraits commissioned during middle age often portrayed individuals surrounded by symbols of permanence, libraries, estates, hunting dogs, classical columns, or ancient oak trees, suggesting that their achievements would endure long after their own lifetimes ended. Despite their immense privilege, many members of the upper classes genuinely believed they carried significant responsibilities towards society. The Victorian idea of noble duty encouraged wealthy landowners to support schools, hospitals, churches, libraries, museums, orphanages, and charitable organizations. During harsh winters, some estates distributed food, coal, blankets, or financial assistance to struggling villagers. Industrialists occasionally funded parks, public baths, universities, and workers' housing. While these efforts rarely eliminated inequality, they reflected a widespread belief that extraordinary privilege should be accompanied by visible acts of public generosity. As the 19th century drew toward its close, subtle signs suggested that this magnificent world stood at the edge of profound transformation. Electric streetlights gradually replaced gas lamps. Motor cars occasionally appeared beside elegant horse-drawn carriages, attracting curious crowds. Women's education expanded, challenging traditional expectations. Newspapers reached wider audiences than ever before, spreading information rapidly across the country. New political voices demanded greater equality, and the rigid social hierarchy that had defined Victorian Britain for decades slowly began to loosen. Few could have predicted how dramatically the 20th century would reshape the lives of Britain's aristocracy. If you stood quietly outside one of these great houses on a clear autumn evening, you might hear the distant melody of a piano drifting through open windows, smell wood smoke rising from dozens of chimneys, and watch warm golden light spill across perfectly trimmed gardens. Inside, guests laughed over elaborate dinners, while servants moved silently through hidden corridors carrying silver trays polished to mirror brightness. Even something as ordinary as receiving visitors became an elaborate ceremony among the Victorian elite. Guests rarely arrived unexpectedly. Calling cards were delivered in advance, carefully engraved with family names and titles, allowing households to decide whether and when to return the visit. A gentleman's card might be left folded in a particular way to communicate a specific social message, while ladies observed complicated customs governing appropriate visiting hours. Entire books were written explaining the correct etiquette for introductions, invitations, and correspondence. To outsiders, these rules might seem exhausting. but to those raised within aristocratic circles, they created a predictable social order where everyone understood their place. Morning rides through the countryside offered another glimpse into privileged life. While factory workers hurried through smoke-filled streets, wealthy landowners often mounted finely bred horses shortly after breakfast and explored miles of private woodland, open fields and quiet streams. Deer wandered beneath ancient oaks, pheasants scattered through tall grass, and gardeners paused respectfully as riders passed. These landscapes were not public parks, but personal property stretching farther than the eye could see. Some estates were so vast that a full day's ride remained entirely within the owner's boundaries. Generations of careful landscaping had transformed ordinary farmland into scenes resembling paintings, complete with rolling hills, carefully placed lakes, elegant bridges, and avenues of towering trees planted decades or even centuries earlier. The library remained one of the most treasured rooms in many great houses. Entering such a room felt like stepping into another world. Shelves climbed toward richly decorated ceilings, accessible only by polished wooden ladders that rolled along brass rails. Leather-bound volumes filled every corner, carrying the scent of aged paper, polished wood, and burning firewood. Globes displayed the expanding British Empire in vivid colours, while maps covered distant territories explored by soldiers, missionaries, merchants, and scientists. Comfortable leather chairs invited long afternoons of quiet reading. Here, gentlemen planned investments, studied military history, read newspapers arriving from across Europe, or simply escaped the endless demands of fashionable society. During storms, when rain lashed against tall windows and wind rattled ancient branches outside, few places in England offered greater comfort. Dinner conversations often reflected Britain's remarkable confidence during the Victorian age. Guests discussed new railway lines crossing continents, massive bridges under construction, telegraph cables connecting distant nations, and steamships shrinking journeys that once required months. News from India, Australia, South Africa, Canada, or Hong Kong seemed almost routine, reinforcing the belief that Britain stood at the centre of an increasingly connected world. Investors proudly described opportunities in mining, shipping, banking, and manufacturing, while retired military officers shared stories from distant colonial campaigns. Many wealthy Victorians sincerely believed they were living during humanity's greatest era of progress, where science and industry would solve nearly every challenge facing civilization. Fashion changed with astonishing speed among fashionable society. A dress admired one season might appear hopelessly outdated only a year later. Wealthy women employed dressmakers capable of creating elaborate gowns using imported silk, velvet, satin, lace, pearls, and intricate embroidery. Some dresses required hundreds of hours of hand sewing before completion. Gentlemen likewise commissioned custom-made coats, waistcoats, trousers, gloves, and boots, designed specifically for riding, hunting, evening banquets, or formal ceremonies. Even umbrellas, walking sticks, pocket watches, and cufflinks reflected personal taste and social standing. Clothing became a language through which wealth quietly announced itself without needing a single spoken word. Servants themselves formed remarkably organized communities within these enormous households. The butler supervised male servants, while the housekeeper managed female staff. Below them worked cooks, assistant cooks, kitchen maids, scullery maids, footmen, chambermaids, gardeners, coachmen, stable hands, laundry workers, nursery staff, and countless others. Large estates operated almost like small villages hidden behind elegant walls. Bells installed throughout the house connected each room to the servants' quarters, allowing family members to summon assistance instantly. Experienced servants developed extraordinary professional pride, polishing silver until it gleamed like mirrors, preparing meals worthy of royal banquets, and maintaining homes so immaculate that dust seemed never to exist. For the wealthiest families, education continued long after formal schooling ended. Private tutors taught foreign languages, fencing, riding, music, philosophy, mathematics, and classical literature. European travel introduced young aristocrats to famous museums, cathedrals, palaces, and ancient ruins. Meeting artists, diplomats, scientists, and political leaders became almost expected within elite circles. Unlike many ordinary Victorians whose worlds remained limited to their local communities, the rich often developed genuinely international perspectives through travel and personal connections spanning much of Europe. Large country estates also became centres of seasonal employment. During harvests, festivals, weddings, or major celebrations, additional workers arrived from surrounding villages. Gardeners planted thousands of flowers months before important gatherings. Carpenters repaired fences and outbuildings. Florists decorated banquet halls with elaborate arrangements. Bakers prepared enormous quantities of bread and desserts. Butchers supplied vast amounts of meat for multi-course feasts. Behind every glamorous event stood weeks of preparation, involving hundreds of individuals whose efforts remained largely unnoticed by elegantly dressed guests. Portrait painting reached extraordinary levels of importance within aristocratic families. Commissioning a portrait from a respected artist represented both an honour and a declaration of permanence. Subjects posed wearing their finest clothing, surrounded by symbols of wealth, such as libraries, horses, estates, or carefully arranged gardens. These paintings decorated hallways for generations, silently introducing descendants to ancestors they would never meet. Walking through one of these galleries felt almost like travelling backward through time, each portrait preserving another chapter of family history stretching across centuries. The Victorian elite also developed a fascination with collecting unusual curiosities. Cabinets displayed fossils discovered along English coastlines, butterflies gathered from tropical forests, ancient Roman coins unearthed during archaeological excavations, minerals from distant mountains, stuffed exotic birds, carved ivory, Japanese ceramics, Chinese porcelain, and countless objects brought home by travellers exploring the expanding empire. Visitors admired these collections not only for their beauty, but because they represented curiosity, education, and global influence. Possessing rare objects demonstrated that one belonged to a class capable of reaching every corner of the world. As evening approached, servants moved quietly through the house, drawing heavy curtains against the fading light. Fireplaces crackled warmly as oil lamps and later gas lamps illuminated richly decorated interiors with soft golden light. Outside, darkness settled across carefully maintained gardens while owls called from distant woods. Inside, crystal glasses reflected dancing flames as guests gathered for one final conversation, before retiring to bedrooms prepared hours earlier by attentive servants. Fresh water stood ready in elegant washstands. Nightclothes rested neatly upon polished chairs. Curtains had already been closed, beds turned down, and fires carefully adjusted to keep rooms comfortable until morning. Every detail had been anticipated long before anyone asked for it. Perhaps the most remarkable feature of this extraordinary lifestyle was how completely it insulated its inhabitants from the ordinary rhythms of survival. They rarely fetched water, chopped firewood, scrubbed floors, cooked meals, repaired clothing, cleaned chimneys, tended livestock, or worried about the next harvest. Those responsibilities belonged to others. The wealthy instead devoted their energy to politics, culture, philanthropy, travel, collecting art, managing investments, hosting elegant gatherings, and preserving family traditions. Their world appeared calm, orderly, and timeless, almost untouched by the smoke, noise, and relentless labour transforming Victorian Britain beyond their estate walls. Looking back today, it is easy to be captivated by the elegance of that vanished world. The magnificent country houses glowing beneath candlelight, the polished carriages rolling across gravel driveways, the grand staircases echoing with the footsteps of elegantly dressed guests, the libraries filled with centuries of knowledge, and the endless gardens stretching toward the horizon. Yet beneath every polished floorboard and every glittering chandelier stood the invisible work of countless servants, labourers, craftsmen, miners, factory workers, sailors, and farmers, whose efforts sustained an empire and financed a lifestyle almost unimaginable by modern standards. The filthy rich of Victorian England lived in extraordinary comfort, surrounded by beauty, refinement, and privilege. But their remarkable world was inseparable from the vast and complicated society that existed beyond the gates of their magnificent estates. As the years passed, many members of the Victorian upper class developed routines that hardly changed from one decade to the next. Stability itself became one of their greatest luxuries. Breakfast appeared at nearly the same hour each morning. Letters were delivered according to a predictable schedule. Afternoon tea arrived with remarkable precision. Dinner was announced by the butler at exactly the appointed time, and evenings concluded with familiar rituals of conversation, music, or reading before servants quietly extinguished lamps throughout the house. For families whose ancestors had occupied the same estate for generations, life possessed an almost timeless quality. The changing seasons marked the passage of time more noticeably than changing fashions or political events. Zone fascinating privilege enjoyed by the wealthy was the ability to commission almost anything they desired. If a family admired a particular painting hanging in an Italian palace, they could hire an artist to produce a faithful copy. If they wished to build an entirely new wing onto their country house, architects, masons, carpenters, and decorators could spend years turning sketches into reality. Furniture makers created tables, wardrobes, and bookshelves specifically designed for individual rooms. Jewelers crafted unique necklaces and brooches carrying family crests. Silversmiths engraved dining services with initials that would remain in use for generations. Even gardens were redesigned whenever tastes changed, requiring teams of labourers to reshape hillsides, redirect streams, plant thousands of trees, or construct elaborate fountains. Wealth gave people the extraordinary ability to reshape their surroundings according to imagination rather than necessity. Visitors from abroad often remarked upon the astonishing size of English country houses. Some contained more than 100 rooms, including guest bedrooms, nurseries, libraries, galleries, chapels, conservatories, servants' quarters, wine cellars, kitchens, laundry rooms, billiard halls, and ballrooms. Exploring the entire house could take hours. It was not unusual for children to become lost in unfamiliar corridors or hidden staircases. Some estates even contained secret passages, originally constructed centuries earlier for protection during times of political unrest. These hidden spaces later became sources of fascination for younger family members who transformed them into settings for adventurous games on rainy afternoons. Meals reflected Britain's worldwide influence more than perhaps any other aspect of daily life. The breakfast table might feature tea from India, coffee from South America, sugar from the Caribbean, spices from Ceylon, oranges from Spain, and preserves made from fruits grown in carefully heated greenhouses. Dinner menus expanded even further, incorporating oysters transported from distant coasts, wines imported from France and Portugal, cheeses from across Europe, and tropical fruits that astonished visitors unfamiliar with such luxuries. Every meal quietly celebrated the global trade networks, connecting Britain to nearly every continent. Although wealth insulated families from many hardships, it also created constant expectations of generosity. Wealthy landowners frequently found themselves approached for financial assistance by churches, schools, hospitals, village organizations, military charities, disaster relief funds, and countless other causes. Refusing every request risked appearing selfish, while giving too freely encouraged even more appeals. As a result, many aristocrats developed lifelong habits of philanthropy, funding libraries, restoring ancient churches, sponsoring scholarships, supporting hospitals, and financing public works within nearby communities. Their names often appeared carved into stone buildings that still stand today, reminders of fortunes used not only for private comfort but also for public recognition. The Victorian fascination with improvement extended even to household management. Estate owners proudly introduced modern farming techniques, experimented with new crop varieties, improved drainage systems, and invested in advanced machinery long before such equipment became common elsewhere. Competitions rewarded the finest livestock, healthiest horses, and most productive farms. Agricultural journals circulated among wealthy landowners, eager to increase efficiency across thousands of acres. Owning land meant more than collecting rent. For many, it became an opportunity to demonstrate intelligence, innovation, and responsible stewardship. Entertainment within great houses occasionally reached extraordinary levels of extravagance. Amateur theatrical performances transformed ballrooms into temporary stages complete with painted scenery and elaborate costumes. Fireworks illuminated gardens during summer celebrations, reflecting brilliantly across ornamental lakes. Some families organized elaborate historical pageants where guests dressed as medieval knights, Roman senators, or characters from Shakespeare. Others invited famous actors, opera singers, or musicians to perform privately before select audiences. Such evenings became legendary within fashionable society, remembered and discussed long after the final guests departed. The Victorian love of collecting extended beyond art into natural history. Wealthy gentlemen often maintained rooms filled with carefully labelled fossils, minerals, pressed plants, shells, butterflies, birds' eggs, and geological specimens gathered during travels or purchased from explorers. Scientific curiosity flourished alongside luxury. Some collectors corresponded with leading naturalists of the day, exchanging discoveries and contributing specimens to museums. Their homes sometimes resembled private museums where beauty, education, and prestige blended together beneath one roof. Gardens remained constant sources of pride. Teams of gardeners worked year-round planting spring bulbs, trimming hedges into precise geometric shapes, maintaining greenhouses, pruning ancient fruit trees, and ensuring lawns appeared perfectly smooth. Victorian gardeners developed astonishing expertise, cultivating flowers that bloomed in carefully planned succession. So the estate remained colourful throughout the year. Visitors strolling through these landscapes admired not merely nature, but the extraordinary human effort required to shape it into apparent perfection. The relationship between masters and servants could be surprisingly complex. While strict social boundaries certainly existed, many servants remained with the same family for decades, watching children grow into adults and later caring for the next generation. A trusted butler or housekeeper often knew the family's habits better than distant relatives did. During moments of illness, bereavement, or celebration, long-serving staff sometimes became deeply respected figures within the household. Loyalty flowed both ways more often than outsiders might imagine, although equality remained firmly out of reach. Victorian society also placed tremendous importance upon first impressions. Arriving at a grand house involved an almost theatrical sequence. A carriage rolled beneath an imposing entrance. Footmen hurried forward to open doors. Luggage disappeared almost instantly. Guests were welcomed into richly decorated entrance halls, where polished marble, towering staircases, enormous mirrors, and family portraits immediately established the household status. Every detail had been carefully arranged to communicate refinement before a single conversation even began. Even the sounds surrounding the wealthy differed from those experienced by ordinary Victorians. Instead of the relentless clatter of factory machinery, their days were filled with birdsong drifting through open windows, horses' hooves upon gravel driveways, distant church bells, the ticking of elegant grandfather clocks, crackling fireplaces, piano music echoing through drawing rooms, and polite conversation carried softly across candlelit dining tables. Silence itself became a luxury, particularly for families whose estates lay miles away from crowded industrial towns. As Queen Victoria's long reign neared its conclusion, many members of the upper classes sensed they had witnessed one of the most extraordinary periods in British history. During a single lifetime, they had seen railways spread across the nation, steamships dominate the seas, telegraphs connect continents, photography preserve memories, electricity begin illuminating homes, and medicine gradually improve. Their generation had lived through remarkable transformation, while remaining surrounded by traditions stretching back centuries. Ancient castles stood alongside modern railway stations. Horse-drawn carriages shared roads with the earliest motor vehicles. Candlelit banquets continued even as electric lights slowly appeared in neighbouring houses. For many aristocratic families, the 19th century ended with cautious optimism. Their estates remained magnificent, their influence substantial, and Britain's empire larger than ever before. Standing upon the terrace of a great country house at sunset, watching servants prepare the evening meal while golden light spread across rolling fields owned by the same family for generations, it must have seemed almost impossible to imagine that this carefully ordered world would soon begin to change. Within only a few decades, wars, economic upheaval, Rising taxes, political reforms, and changing social values would reshape the fortunes of many great houses forever. But during the height of Victorian England, before those dramatic transformations arrived, the filthy rich inhabited one of history's most privileged worlds. For those born into immense wealth, there was also a powerful sense that history itself belonged to their family. Many aristocratic houses contained records stretching back hundreds of years, preserving handwritten letters, marriage contracts, military commissions, portraits, diaries, and account books that documented generations of ancestors. Children grew up hearing stories about great-grandfathers who had fought alongside famous generals, relatives who had advised kings and queens, or distant family members who had built parts of the estate centuries earlier. Walking through the halls of their own homes often felt like walking through a living museum. Every portrait on the wall represented someone whose decisions had shaped the family's future. Every antique chair, every carved fireplace, and every stained glass window carried memories that stretched far beyond a single lifetime. Unlike ordinary families who often moved from one rented house to another, the Victorian elite frequently lived in places where their surname had been associated with the land for centuries. Many of these grand estates operated almost like self-contained kingdoms. Beyond the main house stood bakeries producing fresh bread each morning, dairies supplying milk and butter, workshops repairing furniture and farm equipment, blacksmiths shoeing horses, greenhouses growing vegetables throughout the winter, orchards producing apples and pears, and extensive kitchen gardens capable of feeding dozens of people every day. The estate often generated much of what the household consumed, reducing dependence on outside suppliers. Visitors could spend weeks on such a property without ever needing to leave its boundaries. It was an entire world carefully organized around one family's comfort. The kitchens hidden beneath these magnificent houses resembled busy restaurants rather than ordinary domestic spaces. Long wooden tables held endless rows of ingredients waiting to be transformed into elaborate meals. Massive coal-fired ovens baked fresh bread before sunrise. Copper pots large enough to feed hundreds hung from iron hooks polished until they gleamed. The head cooks supervised assistants with military precision, ensuring every course reached the dining room at exactly the right moment. Ice, harvested from frozen lakes during winter and stored deep underground in specially insulated ice houses, allowed chilled desserts and cold drinks to remain available during warmer months. Preparing a single formal dinner might occupy the kitchen staff from dawn until late at night. Wine cellars represented another quiet display of wealth. Deep beneath the house, where temperatures remained cool throughout the year, shelves stretched into the darkness carrying thousands of carefully stored bottles from France, Portugal, Germany, and other celebrated wine regions. Some collections had been built gradually over generations, with rare vintages preserved for important celebrations decades in the future. The butler knew every shelf by memory, selecting bottles appropriate for each course of an elaborate meal. Serving the wrong wine with the wrong dish would have been considered a serious embarrassment in elite society. For wealthy gentlemen, membership in exclusive London clubs became an important part of daily life. These private institutions offered elegant dining rooms, libraries, smoking lounges, reading rooms, and comfortable accommodations for members visiting the capital. Politicians debated legislation, military officers exchanged news from overseas campaigns, businessmen negotiated investments worth enormous sums, and explorers returned with stories from distant corners of the empire. Membership itself served as a badge of social acceptance. Many clubs maintained waiting lists stretching for years, admitting only those considered suitable by existing members. The rich also experienced news differently from the average Victorian. Newspapers arrived several times each day, carrying reports not only from London, but from every part of the expanding British Empire. Telegraph messages allowed breaking news from India, Canada, Australia, South Africa, or Europe to reach breakfast tables with astonishing speed. Families discussed elections, scientific discoveries, royal ceremonies, military campaigns, and stock market developments over morning coffee, giving them an unusually broad awareness of world events. Wealth provided access to information almost as valuable as access to luxury itself. One often forgotten aspect of aristocratic life was the enormous importance placed upon handwriting. Long before typewriters became common, beautifully written letters reflected education and refinement. Invitations, thank you notes, condolences, business correspondence, and personal messages all required elegant penmanship. Some wealthy individuals wrote hundreds of letters every month, maintaining friendships and business relationships across Britain and beyond. Secretaries occasionally assisted with official correspondence, but many personal letters remained entirely handwritten, each page revealing something of the writer's personality through the careful formation of every word. Gardens changed dramatically as evening approached. During the day, they served as places for walks, conversations, and outdoor games. At sunset, they became peaceful landscapes, where the sounds of birds gradually gave way to crickets and distant owls. Lamps illuminated winding pathways, while fountains reflected the fading colours of the sky. Couples sometimes wandered through rose gardens after dinner, discussing politics, literature, travel plans, or future marriages beneath the gentle glow of lanterns. The carefully designed beauty of these gardens offered an escape from the formal expectations waiting inside the house. The Victorian elite also developed a fascination with collecting family heirlooms. Watches passed from grandfather to grandson. Jewellery worn at royal celebrations became treasured possessions handed down through generations. Silver tea services engraved with family crests remained in daily use for decades. Antique furniture acquired during the 18th century continued occupying the same rooms well into the late 19th century. Unlike modern consumer culture, where possessions are often replaced quickly, wealthy Victorian families valued continuity. Objects gained significance because they carried stories linking one generation to the next. Not all members of the upper classes spent their lives in idleness. Many took their responsibilities seriously, rising early to inspect farms, review estate accounts, meet architects, supervising repairs, discuss crop yields with tenants, or correspond with government officials. Managing thousands of acres required careful planning, especially during years of poor harvests or economic uncertainty. A neglected estate reflected poorly upon its owner, while a well-managed one earned admiration throughout the surrounding county. Success demanded organisation, discipline, and long-term thinking rather than simple extravagance. Social rank influenced nearly every interaction. Even at formal dinners, seating arrangements followed strict rules reflecting titles, age, and family importance. A duchess would not be seated randomly beside an unknown guest, nor would a prominent politician be placed far from the host without careful consideration. Hosts spent considerable time planning these arrangements to encourage lively conversation while avoiding awkward combinations of guests who disliked one another. Such details might appear trivial today, but within Victorian society, they represented essential elements of successful hospitality. As the decades advanced, photography gradually became more affordable, and wealthy families embraced it enthusiastically. Albums preserved images of hunting parties standing proudly beside horses, children playing on immaculate lawns, elegant ladies posing beneath flowering trees, and entire households gathered on grand staircases, surrounded by servants. These photographs captured a world that seemed remarkably permanent at the time, even though history would soon transform it beyond recognition. The Victorian obsession with order extended into every corner of the household. Boots stood neatly aligned in dressing rooms. Books returned precisely to their assigned shelves. Silverware occupied specially designed drawers lined with velvet. Linens were folded according to established methods, taught from one generation of housekeepers to the next. Even flowers arranged on dining tables followed artistic principles, balancing colour, height, and fragrance. Nothing appeared accidental, because almost nothing was left to chance. There were evenings when distinguished guests stayed long after dinner had ended, gathering around crackling fireplaces as rain tapped gently against tall windows. Someone might begin reading passages from a newly published novel, while others listened with quiet attention. Another guest might describe recent travels through the Alps or recount an audience with a member of the royal family. Laughter echoed through richly decorated rooms as servants silently replenished tea, coffee, or fine wines. Outside, the world remained cold and dark, but inside the great house warmth conversation, and luxury created an atmosphere of complete security. Perhaps that feeling of security was the greatest privilege of all. The wealthy rarely questioned whether tomorrow's meals were assured, whether fuel remained for winter, or whether illness would immediately plunge the family into poverty. They planned years ahead rather than days. They invested in forests knowing they would mature long after their own lifetimes. They commissioned buildings intended to stand for centuries. They educated children not merely for employment, but for leadership. There were also countless small luxuries that rarely appeared in paintings or history books, but quietly transformed everyday life for the Victorian elite. Imagine never having to worry about polishing your own shoes, washing your own clothes, repairing torn sleeves, or even making your own bed. Before breakfast, every room had already been dusted, fireplaces cleaned, ashes removed, carpets brushed, and curtains opened to welcome the morning light. If rain had fallen overnight, servants wiped every entrance dry before the family descended the staircase. If frost covered the paths, workers spread gravel or sand to prevent anyone from slipping. Comfort was not simply provided, it was anticipated. The greatest servants were those who solved problems before their employers even realized they existed. The wealthy often measured success not by how much they personally accomplished, but by how smoothly everything around them functioned. A perfectly managed estate reflected discipline and intelligence. Visitors noticed spotless windows, healthy livestock, flourishing gardens, polished brass door handles, and servants who performed their duties almost silently. Every detail contributed to an atmosphere suggesting complete order. Chaos was considered deeply embarrassing. If dinner arrived late, a carriage broke down unexpectedly, or flowers wilted before an important reception, the household staff treated it as a serious failure rather than a minor inconvenience. Many aristocratic families developed favourite rooms that reflected their personalities. A retired military officer might spend hours inside a study decorated with maps, swords, medals, and miniature models of famous warships. A lady interested in painting filled her morning room with easels, sketchbooks, and watercolours, overlooking beautiful gardens. Elderly grandparents often preferred sunny libraries where they could read beside crackling fireplaces, while grandchildren played quietly on richly patterned carpets nearby. Unlike modern homes where every room serves several purposes, Victorian mansions frequently contained specialised spaces designed for almost every activity imaginable. During long winter evenings, storytelling remained one of the household's greatest pleasures. Elderly relatives described adventures from decades earlier, recalling journeys across Europe before railways existed or recounting meetings with famous politicians, inventors, and members of the royal family. Children listened with fascination as grandparents spoke about great storms at sea, spectacular royal celebrations, hunting expeditions across Scottish highlands, or unforgettable winters when snow covered the countryside for weeks. These stories strengthened family identity, reminding younger generations that they belonged to a long chain of history stretching far beyond their own lifetimes. Birthdays among the wealthy could become elaborate celebrations involving dozens of guests, musicians, beautifully decorated dining rooms, and expensive gifts carefully selected months in advance. Jewelers created personalized lockets engraved with family crests. Watchmakers crafted elegant pocket watches, and booksellers supplied beautifully illustrated editions bound in leather. Young girls received finely dressed dolls imported from France, while boys often received miniature trains, telescopes, scientific instruments, or riding equipment. The exchange of gifts reflected affection, but also reinforced family traditions, encouraging treasured possessions to remain within the family for generations. Seasonal traditions played an enormous role in aristocratic life. Spring brought garden walks beneath flowering trees and preparations for London's fashionable season. Summer encouraged grand picnics, boating parties, tennis matches, and long evenings spent outdoors, while daylight lingered late into the evening. Autumn transformed estates into centres of hunting, harvest celebrations, and magnificent displays of golden leaves covering ancient avenues. Winter gathered everyone indoors beside enormous fireplaces where candlelight reflected from polished wood and crystal glasses during festive dinners. Unlike crowded industrial cities, where changing seasons often meant changing hardships, the wealthy experienced each season primarily through its beauty and traditions. The relationship between wealthy families and their local villages often extended across generations. Estate owners attended church alongside tenants every Sunday, supported village schools, funded repairs to historic buildings, and occasionally organised annual festivals, featuring music, games, food, and prizes for local children. While social divisions remained unmistakable, many villagers viewed the great house as the centre of community life. Weddings, jubilees, coronations, and national celebrations frequently involved both the estate and surrounding villages, creating moments when different social classes briefly shared the same festivities, even if they celebrated from very different positions. Many Victorian gentlemen became passionate collectors of clocks, Grandfather clocks stood proudly in entrance halls, smaller mantel clocks decorated drawing rooms, and elegant pocket watches accompanied gentlemen wherever they travelled. Precision fascinated the Victorians. Accurate timekeeping reflected discipline, scientific progress, and civilization itself. The gentle ticking of dozens of clocks echoed quietly throughout great houses, marking hours with comforting regularity as servants organized daily routines around their dependable rhythm. The wealthy also possessed remarkable wardrobes compared to ordinary people. Instead of owning only a few practical outfits, they maintained separate clothing for breakfast, afternoon visits, riding, hunting, travelling, formal dinners, evening receptions, garden parties, morning, seaside holidays, and royal ceremonies. Dressing correctly for every occasion demonstrated not only wealth, but knowledge of social expectations. Experienced ladies' maids and valets memorized complicated wardrobes, ensuring every garment appeared perfectly pressed and appropriate before their employers entered the room. Children fortunate enough to grow up on enormous estates often enjoyed adventures impossible elsewhere. They explored hidden woodlands, climbed ancient trees planted centuries earlier, searched streams for fish and frogs, built imaginary forts beneath towering oaks, and raced across endless lawns, stretching toward distant lakes. Although their education remained strict, they also experienced childhood within landscapes large enough to spark endless imagination. Secret gardens, forgotten towers, abandoned gatehouses, and winding hedge mazes transformed ordinary afternoons into unforgettable adventures. Many grand houses also contained private chapels where family members gathered for prayers without leaving the estate. Weddings, baptisms, memorial services, and Christmas celebrations sometimes took place within these intimate spaces, beautifully decorated with stained glass, carved wood, and family memorials. Religion remained closely connected with family identity, tradition, and public respectability throughout the Victorian period. As Britain grew wealthier through industrial expansion, luxury goods became increasingly elaborate. Crystal manufacturers produced dazzling chandeliers that scattered light across entire ballrooms. Piano makers created magnificent instruments decorated with carved wood and polished brass. Cabinet makers combined rare woods imported from around the empire into astonishingly beautiful furniture. Glass houses protected delicate tropical plants throughout harsh English winters. Advances in manufacturing allowed even greater extravagance, encouraging wealthy families to renovate rooms according to the latest fashions while preserving treasured antiques alongside modern creations. Perhaps the most striking difference between the rich and everyone else lay in their relationship with the future. Ordinary workers often worried about surviving until next week, while wealthy families planned improvements that would not be completed for decades. They planted forests whose timber would mature long after they had died. They built libraries expecting future generations to add thousands more books. They expanded gardens knowing newly planted trees would reach full height only in their grandchildren's lifetimes. They commissioned portraits intended to watch silently over descendants not yet born. Wealth encouraged patience because time itself seemed abundant on quiet evenings after guests had departed. And the great house finally grew still. An aristocrat might stand beside a tall window overlooking moonlit gardens stretching into the distance. Somewhere beyond the darkness, gardeners' cottages, tenant farms, village churches, winding rivers, and quiet forests formed part of an estate carefully maintained through generations. Inside the house, clocks ticked steadily, fireplaces glowed softly, and polished furniture reflected the last flickering candlelight before servants completed their final rounds. It must have been difficult in such moments to imagine that this carefully ordered world could ever disappear. Yet history reminds us that no age lasts forever. The magnificent houses, glittering social seasons, elegant carriages, elaborate etiquette, endless banquets, and seemingly permanent fortunes represented the high point of an extraordinary era. They belong to a society overflowing with confidence, convinced that tradition and prosperity would continue indefinitely. Even after the guests had gone home and the excitement of grand banquets had faded, life inside a Victorian mansion never truly stopped. Long before dawn, while the family still slept beneath heavy curtains and feather-filled mattresses, the servants' day had already begun. Fires needed to be lit in dozens of fireplaces before anyone awoke. Hot water had to be carried upstairs in heavy copper containers. Floors were swept, boots polished, silver inspected, breakfast ingredients prepared, and fresh flowers placed in drawing rooms before the first member of the household appeared. The remarkable comfort enjoyed by the wealthy rested upon an army of invisible workers whose efforts began hours before sunrise and often continued long after midnight. To the family, everything simply seemed to happen naturally, almost as if the house itself possessed the ability to care for them. One of the greatest symbols of wealth was the ability to entertain royalty or distinguished public figures. If word arrived that a prince, a cabinet minister, or a celebrated military commander intended to visit, preparations intensified dramatically. Bedrooms received new linens, walls were redecorated where necessary, gardens underwent additional maintenance, and cooks designed menus worthy of the occasion. Servants rehearsed every detail repeatedly so that nothing appeared rushed or uncertain. Hosting such guests elevated the family's reputation throughout Britain, and successful visits were remembered for decades afterward. The upper classes also possessed a remarkable sense of confidence in the institutions surrounding them. Parliament, the monarchy, the Church of England, prestigious universities, ancient legal traditions, and inherited titles all seemed permanent and unshakable. Many aristocrats sincerely believed that Britain had discovered the ideal balance between progress and stability. Railways, telegraphs, factories, and scientific discoveries represented the future, while castles, cathedrals, country estates, and noble traditions preserved the past. Few societies had ever attempted to combine rapid modernization with such deep respect for history, and for much of the Victorian period, it appeared to work remarkably well. Visitors from America were often astonished by the age of aristocratic houses. In a country where many buildings were only decades-old, English estates displayed stone walls that had witnessed hundreds of years of history. Some dining halls had hosted banquets before Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic. Oak trees lining private avenues had been planted during the reigns of Tudor monarchs. Ancient family chapels contained memorials carved centuries before the Industrial Revolution transformed Britain. Time itself seemed to flow differently inside these places, where each generation viewed itself as temporary guardians rather than permanent owners. Despite all the luxury, the wealthy still faced certain expectations that could not easily be escaped. A gentleman inherited not only land but responsibility. He was expected to oversee tenants fairly, maintain the estate, support local charities, serve as a magistrate when required, contribute to public life, and protect the family's reputation through honourable conduct failure. In these duties attracted criticism just as quickly as financial recklessness. Privilege came with obligations that society constantly observed. For women of the aristocracy, charitable work gradually became an increasingly important part of daily life. Many organised hospital fundraising events, visited orphanages, supported schools for girls, established sewing groups for poor families, and arranged Christmas gifts for village children. Some became passionate advocates for nursing, public health, or education. Although their opportunities remained limited compared with men, many upper-class women quietly exercised considerable influence through philanthropy and community leadership. The Victorian fascination with collecting extended even into travel. Every journey produced souvenirs carefully selected to remind families of distant places. Marble sculptures arrived from Italy. Hand-woven carpets came from the Middle East. Delicate porcelain was imported from East Asia. Carved furniture reached England from India. Seashells, pressed flowers, rare books, maps, antique coins, and scientific specimens all found places within carefully arranged display cabinets. Every object carried a story, transforming the house into a physical record of a family's experiences across the world. As evening settled over London during the social season, the city's wealthiest neighbourhoods transformed into dazzling spectacles of light. Gas lamps illuminated elegant streets lined with magnificent townhouses. Horse-drawn carriages rolled continuously from one reception to another, their wheels echoing across stone roads. Ladies wearing silk gowns stepped gracefully onto red carpets, while gentlemen in immaculate evening dress greeted hosts beneath sparkling chandeliers. Music drifted through open windows into the warm summer night as conversations continued until the early hours of the morning. For those fortunate enough to belong to this exclusive society, London itself became an enormous stage upon which status, elegance, and influence were displayed every evening. The education of children reflected the family's long-term ambitions. Boys destined to inherit estates learned not only history and mathematics, but also estate management, politics, public speaking, riding, hunting, and leadership. Girls received extensive instruction in languages, literature, music, painting, etiquette, and household administration. Parents understood that their children would one day represent the family within society, and considerable effort went into preparing them for those responsibilities. Excellence was expected not because survival depended upon it, but because reputation did. One remarkable aspect of Victorian wealth was the preservation of tradition through ritual. Family members often occupied the same seats at dinner year after year. Certain recipes appeared every Christmas without exception. Particular rooms hosted the same celebrations each season. Ancestors' birthdays might be remembered with quiet family gatherings long after their deaths. Even walks through the gardens sometimes followed routes established generations earlier. Such rituals created continuity, giving family members a comforting sense that they belonged to something much larger than themselves. Weather could dramatically influence the atmosphere of a great house. During heavy rain, Servants hurried to close shutters while fires burned brightly in every occupied room. Guests gathered around card tables or grand pianos as storms rattled ancient windows. Snow transformed estates into peaceful white landscapes, where children enjoyed sleigh rides and adults admired the beauty from warm drawing rooms overlooking frozen lakes. Spring filled conservatories with blossoms from around the world, while autumn brought the rich scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke drifting through crisp evening air. Every season possessed its own traditions, decorations, and rhythms. Perhaps the greatest luxury enjoyed by the Victorian elite was the freedom to preserve beauty simply because it brought pleasure. They planted gardens that produced no profit, commissioned paintings purely for admiration, restored ancient buildings whose maintenance cost enormous sums, collected books they might never completely read, and created landscapes designed to inspire quiet reflection rather than commercial success. In an increasingly industrial world driven by factories and production, the wealthy retained the ability to value elegance for its own sake. Looking back now, it is easy to understand why Victorian mansions continue to fascinate millions of people around the world. They represent more than extraordinary wealth. They symbolize an entire civilization that celebrated craftsmanship, ceremony, patience, education, architecture, and tradition on a scale rarely matched before or since. Every polished staircase, every carved ceiling, every library filled with leather-bound books, every rose garden blooming beneath ancient stone walls, tells the story of people who believed that beauty deserved to be preserved, that family legacy mattered deeply, and that a well-lived life combined comfort with culture. And so, as another evening came to a close somewhere in Victorian England, the last candles would gradually be extinguished one by one. Servants would quietly lock heavy oak doors, draw velvet curtains across tall windows, and ensure every fire burned safely through the night. Outside, moonlight settled over silent gardens, winding rivers, grazing deer, and ancient trees that had watched generations come and go. Inside, the great house rested peacefully, filled with priceless paintings, treasured heirlooms, handwritten letters, and centuries of memories. It stood not merely as a home, but as a monument to an age of extraordinary confidence, immense privilege, and refined elegance, an age whose echoes can still be felt today whenever we wander through the magnificent country houses that remain as silent witnesses to the remarkable lives of the filthy rich during Victorian England.